Innovation Facility for the University of Nebraska at the Nebraska Innovation Campus. No funds appropriated in this section shall be expended unless the University of Nebraska certifies to the budget administrator of the Budget Division of the Department of Administrative Services the receipt of matching funds in the amount of $25 million from private or non-state funds for the purpose of establishing the Agricultural Innovation Facility. The Crime Lab, which I do still have questions about the Crime Lab, but I'm not really sure who's the appropriate person to ask them. Probably the State Patrol, because we are investing in construction of a new crime lab, and I'm just curious about what that's going to look like and how that's going to be staffed and what sort of testing will be happening there, because as we've talked about in the past in this body, we are behind on our sexual assault kit testing, and so if this is going to help expand that capacity, that'd be great. I would love to know more about it. Maybe once it's built, we can all go visit. There's housing in here, and the amount appropriation, 99 million. Cash fund state aid, which shall be used for the purposes included in the amount shown as the aid to this program for 50 million cash funds from the Nebraska Rural Projects Fund. There is included in the amount shown as aid for the program cash funds for Rural Workforce Investment Fund. There is money for lead-based paint hazard control cash fund, which is really important. A lot of older homes had lead-based paint, and even though they've been updated or painted over, it still is a real issue for children who might ingest some of those paint chips, and then that causes all kinds of developmental problems, especially the younger they are and the more lead that they get into their system. So that's something that is one of the screenings that you have at your pediatrician's office every year is for lead in their blood. Make sure that they're not having too much of that. My house was built at a time where lead paint was a thing, and so you have to get this whole pamphlet about it. So for those of you who are renters, you might be getting pamphlets about the year your apartment building was built, and it's the lead-based paint, and that's why. So don't eat the paint chips. It's a pro tip there. Even if they aren't lead-based, I would recommend against eating the paint chips. On page 51, we have the Federal Child and Development Block Grant of 1990, and shall be used to increase child care provider rates at the 75th percentile of the market rate survey. Oh, I think I know whose bill that is. Senator Wendy DeBoer. Great work. Let's see here. What else do we have? Managed care, excess profit funds for Medicaid assistance. Okay, so this is the Department of Administrative Services shall monitor the appropriations and expenditures for this program according to the following program classification: medical assistance, Medicaid expansion aid. There is included in the appropriations to this program for 21-22 $989 million general funds, 63 million cash funds, and 2 billion federal estimated for state aid, which shall only be used for such purpose. There is included in the appropriation to this program for 22-23 $999 million general funds, 42 million cash funds, and 2.26 billion federal funds, which shall only be used for this purpose for Medicaid Managed Care Excess Profit Fund for medical assistance. So the Nebraska Healthcare Cash Fund. Okay. So managed care. here's a little healthcare, I don't know what you would call it, lesson. So in Nebraska, we have Medicaid. And to administer our Medicaid program in Nebraska, we have contracts with what we call managed care organizations, or MCOs. And so we bid it out. We're actually doing that right now, going through a contract RFP process. So the companies that currently are doing the insurance for our MCOs will probably apply again, and maybe some other healthcare insurance agencies. And then they are the ones who are paying the providers and doing all the paperwork. The state doesn't do all of that, and the federal government doesn't do all of that. I mean, we could, but we hire professionals outside of the state to do that. And so this is the money that sort of we get a specific amount per person, and then they say, okay, we will cover these services for this amount per person, and we'll take 1,000 people at that rate. And then it's kind of a gamble for them if each person costs more than that or less than that. So it's a whole sort of actuarial table. It's actually kind of fascinating. And really, if you read this budget, you'd be like, there's a lot of really interesting things in here. I see there are a lot of people in the queue, and I am almost out of time. So I will yield the remainder of my seconds to the chair and see you all in a bit.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Senator Lathrop, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. Good morning. I wanted to take a moment this morning, or a little bit of time this morning. First of all, I'm in opposition to the Kavanaugh motion. I hope you'll vote for cloture on 1011 and advance or pass LB 1011, to be clear. Second thing I want to talk about is obviously you understand that I've been working on LB 920 and the criminal justice reform. The response to a problem facing the state that is a fiscal reality, that we need to build much more space than has been proposed by the governor unless we figure out what we're going to do with our population. I'm struggling a little bit on this one because I'm having trouble finding someone who can get to yes. I can make offers, I can make proposals, I can negotiate, but it's a challenge to do that when it's hard to find somebody that can say, yeah, that's fine, or here's a counter proposal. And that's what I spent, Senator McKinney and I spent yesterday trying to do. I'm not being critical, but what I'm trying to do, or trying to find out, is why am I having that challenge, right? Why is it so difficult to get in the room and figure out what 920 needs to look like, instead of simply saying, no, we're not going to do that? And it occurred to me on the drive home last night that this thing may be getting caught up in the notion of, is this soft on crime? Is this hard on crime? Are we being tough on crime? Or are we being soft on crime? And I want to talk to you about that, because you need to understand what this does. It enhances public safety. We're not being soft on crime. I want to talk to you about one piece in this 5 minutes, or what's left of it, and that is the idea that we would get someone to parole eligibility sooner. That's an important piece in this bill. It's an important piece. Understand, at the risk of repeating myself for the 500th time, parole eligibility is not the same as getting out. That means you still have to pass by the parole board, appointed by the governor, and approved. And that means you have to jump through some hoops. And the parole board, again, appointed by the governor, 3 of those people have to believe you're a sufficient risk. But understand, when somebody gets out on parole, they are on parole for as long as the remainder of their sentence. Okay? So if somebody gets on parole, let's say 5 years before their mandatory discharge date, that person is going to be followed by parole for 5 years. So if you look at this as somebody's getting out early, you're missing it. because the tough on crime piece is we are now going to follow you for a longer period of time. You will be accountable, you will take drug tests, you will maintain employment, you will report, you could have an ankle monitor. There's nothing soft on crime about that. That's a law enforcement objective, having people followed after they've been released from the department is tough on crime. Here's something to think about. Somebody released from the Department of Corrections is going to move in next door to you. Now, do you want that person who has been released, do you want him to spend one more year in jail and
1
be
minute.
accountable to no one? Or would you rather have him out a year earlier and spend a year as your neighbor accountable to a parole officer? That's not soft on crime. That's being tough on crime. It is you can't message this into something it isn't. And when you try to take this bill and turn it into something it is not, you're missing an opportunity to do good, to enhance public safety, and to solve a problem of the state. These parole provisions that would allow somebody to be parole eligible sooner mean that they will be followed by a parole officer longer. And that is, my friends, tough on crime. If that's where you need to be, it's also smart on crime. And it
Time,
also
Senator.
helps solve our problem. Did you say time?
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Linehan, you're recognized. Senator Linehan, you're recognized.
I'm sorry. Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. So I did actually give Senator Clemens a heads up. So I'm trying to figure out the process here. I think the bill we just passed was what we would call in DC authorization language to start new programs. But the bill we're on currently actually moves money around. So, and then I also had questions about the cash fund versus the capital construction fund. So Senator Clemens, would you yield for some questions?
Senator Clemens, will you yield?
Yes.
So Senator Clemens, if we, in the bill we're on now, it uses money, there's 3 lines under each section that says 3 or 4 lines. It'll be like general funds, cash funds, federal funds, and sometimes there's another line. But so some of the money we're spending in this mill comes from general funds and some of it comes from cash funds. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And to figure that out, we'd look at the bill and look at those headers on the left-hand side of the page and it tells which fund it's coming out of.
Yes, general funds are, state tax dollars. Cash funds are from a cash fund somewhere. Then there's federal funds if the federal government is matching some things, especially like Medicaid.
So on the cash funds, if it's coming out of the cash fund is money. How does the cash fund work?
Well, we have put money into a cash fund, and then this is appropriating the money for a purpose. As in this bill, it's the general fund budget bill that's actually authorizing the spending of money that's been put into a cash fund earlier.
So if we take money from the cash fund, which we're doing like some $500 million in cash fund transfers, I think in these 3 bills, well, this bill and then the next bill. The final bill this morning, I think, is the cash funds. When we move money from the cash fund to the, and I might not get the name of this right, so correct me, please, the capital construction fund?
Yes, Nebraska Capital Construction Fund. Usually that money goes in there out of our cash reserve. Those are usually one-time projects. And then the authorization from the Capital Construction Fund actually funds the project.
But when we put money in the capital construction fund from the cash reserve fund, then it actually gets appropriated twice, right? We put money in the cash reserve fund and then you put it in the capital fund.
It takes 2 operations to actually spend it.
So the money that we have spent updating the capital HVAC and painting the walls, that came from the capital construction fund?
Yes, first we take it out of the cash reserve, put it in the capital construction fund, and now this bill spends it from the construction fund for remodeling the Capitol building.
Okay, then finally, since there's much concern about whether we are not building a prison, the compromise is, as I understand it, is we put money in the cash reserve fund, but it's not appropriated to the capital construction fund, or is that right?
It's out of the cash reserve fund is put into the construction fund, but it is not authorized to be spent out of the construction fund.
Okay, so
minute.
for that money could be spent, we'd have to authorize it, and none
Yes.
of that's in this bill.
Correct. The Appropriations Committee did not appropriate any money for or that 175 million to be spent on a prison, but it is sitting off in the construction fund account, but not authorized to be spent.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lanahan and Senator Clements. Senator Friesen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm going to just keep repeating what I've always been saying, and I'm talking more to the audience that hopefully is watching us. I'm going to talk about how, as politicians, we always come around at election time and tell you that we're overtaxed and we're going to cut taxes, we're going to cut spending, and then we come here and we spend money. For the last few years, we've done a pretty good job of holding down the budget. But this year, when revenues come in over forecast, everybody gets sticky fingers and we want to spend the money. And so we're going to increase our budget, our spending by 5.7%. Biggest increase I've seen since probably our first year here. So the reason we're a high tax state is because we're a high spending state. We spend it. And we don't want to give it back to you. We like spending money. I voted against every one of the budget bills this year, and I'm going to continue to vote against them. We haven't really had an opportunity to change these budgets up until now at final reading, which is kind of late. We've had some discussions, but most of it's been centered on other things than the budget. And I just look at everything we're doing this year and all the money that's getting doled out everywhere. Everybody's getting a little piece here and there, but there's a lot of money going out the door. And fundamentally, I don't think it's going to make a big difference, except in certain areas where a lot of money is getting poured into. There's some things I agree with in here, but a lot of it is just plain pork. It's spending because we can. And so when politicians come around and ask for your vote this year, ask them if they voted to increase spending at 5.7%. And they'll tell you, oh, we're going to hold the line on spending. We won't do that again. Don't buy it. Anytime we have revenue, we're going to spend it. Our projections have come in above forecast ever since the pandemic hit. If you look at what's happened, the federal government has dumped $24 billion into Nebraska. $24 billion. It has driven everything. There's businesses with cash in the bank because they did really well during the pandemic, and they also did really well with the distribution of cash from the federal government. And I'm not blaming the businesses for taking that money, because back when it was offered, no one knew what the economy was going to do. But thankfully, Nebraska stayed open for business for the most part, especially in the rural areas. We just continued on with our job like we did before. But when you look at the total dollars that were shoveled into Nebraska, $24 billion, that had a huge impact on our budget. And when that revenue all comes rolling in, the reason we have such high inflation is because everybody's spending it. And we're going to contribute to that inflation by spending our share. You won't be able to find a construction firm that can put up some of the buildings that are proposed because they're all going to be busy. We're already, look at all the supply chain issues that we have. And then you throw the increased spending that we're doing here yet,
1 minute.
we're going to be pushing up the inflation rate even higher. With government spending, we just compete with the private sector for all of those things that are short in the supply chain, and we just double down and make it worse. And so I hope everybody's looking through the budget bills. It's listed out there. You can go online and you can read it, LB 1011. It line items all the increases to every department. And some of those are just wage increases, which they should go up. Inflation is driving the wage increases, pretty good hike. But at the same time, inflation is taking away your buying power. So in the end, I think you're still ahead with the wage increase, but it's going to be close. If we keep these inflation rates in place, I doubt that wages can keep up with the inflation rate. So again, as sooner or later, when the federal
Time,
government
Senator.
decides it has spent enough. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Friesen. Senator McCollister, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This is how the sausage is made, is it not? When we passed 1107 a couple of years ago, that package would include many elements that we thought important to include into a final bill. Well, I'm definitely in support for LB 1011 and other of the bills that will come up before this body. But an important bill for me is 920. We have a historic opportunity to bend the curve on our prison population situation. And I'll be so sad if we can't deal with this in some kind of constructive way. We need to do it. I keep referring back to 1980 when we had 1,400 people in our prison system. Now we've got 5,500 at a time when crime rates have dropped. Senator Lathrop is right. We can't have people jamming out. That's just not good policy, and we can deal with that in some kind of constructive way. It's time to do that, and the time is now. I don't want to look back on this legislative session and working with my colleagues and having missed an opportunity to deal with criminal justice reform like so many states have done in the country. Over 35 states have done this, so this is not reinventing the wheel. We simply need to move forward with this and pass this bill. Pass this bill and also pass LB 920. I yield the balance of my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 315.
Thank you, Mr. President, and Senator McCollister, I appreciate that. Colleagues, there comes a point in time where it becomes our responsibility as policymakers to identify issues facing the state and to address them. The Appropriations Committee, not the Judiciary Committee, the Appropriations Committee recognizes the problem we have. That is that if we do not do something about the growth in our population, we need to build $1 billion worth of facilities for the next 20 years and not simply $270 million. This is a significant problem facing the state. And I will submit to you that LB 920 is the only option that has been presented. For all of the conversation and the people that have concern or whatever, no one's offered a solution besides 920. That's it. And at some point, we have to leave the campaigns outside. We have to thank those who speak to us in the lobby for their input, but at some point it becomes our responsibility to make good policy. And this is a problem that the state faces, And the concerns come from people who don't have to pay this $1 billion for additional capacity or the additional millions, tens of millions of dollars in operating costs. Those are our responsibilities as a state. This is our problem, and it's our problem to solve. Now, the idea that this might turn into some kind of a campaign message, it's off the mark. This is not soft on crime. This is smart. It enhances public safety. When we started the CJI process, I had a press conference with the governor,
1 minute.
kind of announcing that CJI was coming in and what the purpose and how they were going to do it. And I promised at that time that this process, our North Star would be public safety. It is enhanced when people are on parole longer. It is enhanced when we make investments in substance abuse. It is enhanced when we focus on the high need, high risk offender and stop spending jail space on the low risk, low need offender. When we use the Department of Corrections to keep us safe and focus on treatment for those people who have an addiction or a substance abuse problem. That's what we're talking about. And that is not soft on crime. That's being smart on crime.
Time,
And-
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Mosier, you're recognized.
Oops, sorry about the static electricity there. Good morning, colleagues. Three things. One, I want to talk a little bit about the tax cut package that didn't quite pass. And then I want to talk about the budget process a little bit. And then I would like to ask Senator Lathrop a question. So if he's got some time to answer a question when I get to my third point. First of all, I was disappointed in that the tax cut package didn't pass. Current rates have amassed a lot of money, and government can keep that money for future use. It can spend that money, or in the case of the tax cut package, we could give some back to the citizens because we set rates that collected more money than we needed, and we should give that back to the citizens rather than spend it. We've put more into the rainy day fund, so the rainy day fund is nice and healthy. And I think it's our responsibility to give some of that money back. And then, and in a practical part of my observation of the tax cut package not passing is a number of us are running for office. And citizens I talk to, the number one thing is always taxes. The number one things are taxes? Okay, whatever. Hopefully my grammar teacher is going to send me an email and correct my grammar. But how can we run for office and go out and tell people when we go door to door, well, I couldn't vote for that tax cut package. You know, it's too much to give those senior citizens a little less tax on their Social Security. You know, it's too far to go to protect the property tax credit fund. You know, it's too far to go to give tax cut packages to corporations. You know, we collected too much money with current rates. We should adjust those rates, and then we can adjust them the wrong way later if we have to. But corporations aren't all the big fat cat people that you imagine. Some of them are very small. You know, there are a lot of small C Corps, and having a lower tax rate on corporate tax is a good thing, I think. Okay, point number two, talking about the budget. It's disappointing for the budget. I understand the Appropriations Committee meets the whole session on the budget, even in the off years. They spend hours and hours and hours. It's a behemoth task to put all this together because $5 billion is a lot of money. And they're bound to make some mistakes, and we will probably vote for the budget, mistakes included, and just in normal years. But when we're spending so much money at once, it's kind of like, you know, you hit the lottery, and then so you go out and you buy a new car and you buy a new house, and you go on some expensive vacations, and pretty soon, you know, you pay your taxes on your lottery fund and your lottery winnings, and you have no money left. So yeah, those are my concerns on the budget. Then back to, I was wondering if Senator Lathrop would respond to a question about the 920 bill.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Okay, great. So you sent some graphs out that showed the differences where we're going without reform and where we're going with reform.
1 minute.
And there wasn't a whole lot of difference.
Well,
that
first
true?
of all, thank you for that question. Second of all, thank you for reading the stuff that I handed out and going through it. The third thing is there were two graphs, Senator. One was there have been some amendments to 920 offered by Senator Geist. That's the one where there's very little difference between where we're headed and where we'll get to if we adopted that amendment. That's
Well, I don't think we'll probably have enough time here, but the real question I have is, we haven't really made changes to make our sentencing more critical in the last few years, yet the graph is still going up. So what is making the graph increase when the laws haven't changed that much? Is there
Great
some...
question. Great question. And the answer is people are staying longer. Our admissions are going down. So the number of people
Time,
coming in the
Senators.
front door. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mosher and Senator Lathrop. Senator Breezy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. You know, I had been agreeing on the budget proposals, the budget bills, and the ARPA bill all along. But that changed on Friday when the tax proposal ran into those headwinds. Since then, I've been a red. And I'll continue to be a red until we find a path forward on the tax package. And why keep coming back to the tax package? Well, bottom line here, there's just way too much at stake. The tax package is going to prevent a $200 million property tax increase on everyday Nebraskans. It's going to provide an additional $195 million worth of property tax relief. It's going to trim back our growth curtailing high marginal income tax rates. And it's going to protect our seniors. It's going to put more dollars in the hands of our seniors through Social Security tax relief. And so the stakes are way too high here to be playing fast and loose with it. And I certainly appreciate Senator Lathrop's passion for the proposals of 920. And really, I agree with quite a bit of what he says there, a lot of what he says. But again, I don't think we should be playing fast and loose with the tax proposal. Way too much at stake there. You know, I've got bills I'd like to get in that tax proposal. Number one, I tried to get LB 79 in there. LB 79 would have put an escalator in the property tax credit fund, but it was perceived by myself and others as creating too many headwinds for this tax proposal, so we left it out. And that's my perception of LB 920. It creates too many headwinds to be trying to stuff it in to a tax proposal that is extremely important to everyday Nebraskans. We need to get the tax proposal passed. That's all there is to it. It's way too important to be trying to stuff things in at the last minute. And again, Senator Lathrop's ideas, I'm more than willing to consider those ideas, but not in this context. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Colleague Senator Day would like to announce 78 fourth graders from Prairie Queen Elementary in Papillion, along with teachers and sponsors. They are seated in the north balcony. If they would rise and please to be recognized by your Nebraska Legislature. Thank you for coming today. Returning to debate, Senator Pansing Brooks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I wanted to rise and talk some more about being smart on crime, right on crime, all of that information. I ran off an article from a magazine called National Affairs. It's a conservative magazine that is owned and run by conservatives. And there is an article that's called Conservatives and Criminal Justice. So, and it's from spring 2016. In the 1992 presidential campaign, George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton each tried to prove he was toughest on crime. Bush touted a record of escalating the drug war during the Reagan years. Clinton famously flew to Arkansas to stage manage the execution of a mentally disabled killer. Elections at the state level in that period followed the same pattern, with Republicans pushing for ever more severe criminal penalties and Democrats following them as fast as they could run. In the 2016 election, the storyline had almost completely reversed. Hillary Clinton's first major policy speech focused on reducing unnecessary incarceration. And despite attacking her on everything else, no Republican candidate has gone after her for being soft on crime. An electorally driven consensus in favor of ever-expanding punishment is being replaced on both sides by elite agreement on the need to reduce our extraordinary levels of incarceration, make prison conditions more humane, and steer offenders back into productive lives. Liberals and conservatives have arrived at these conclusions from different principles. Liberals tend to view mass incarceration as a product of structural racism and crony capitalism and emphasize the disadvantaged conditions of most offenders. Conservatives see the expansion of prisons as a case of big government run amok and stress the potential for offenders to be spiritually redeemed. Spiritually redeemed. These distinct narratives make prison reform a case of transpartisanship, an agreement on policy goals driven by divergent, deeply held ideological beliefs. This is very different from bipartisanship, in which established institutions facilitate compromise by bringing two sides together to split the difference with grand bargains brokered by party leaders. Transpartisanship, by contrast, is typically led by ideological true believers on the back benches and distinct factions that converge on shared policy positions through separate, independent routes. Transpartisanship agreement on criminal justice was a long time in the making. It was driven by ideological diehards on both sides who worked for years against near hopeless odds before their labors bore fruit. On the right, even at the height of the crime war, that better prison conditions, less incarceration, and better reentry services were genuinely conservative objectives. On the left, ACLU, the Open Society Institute, and other organizations ensured that commitment to lowering incarceration would remain embedded in the liberal identity, even as Democratic politicians did their best to prove themselves tough on crime. So, colleagues, what we're talking about is nationally, we are way behind what's going on nationally with best practices. The view is what we have is government run amok. We have overcrowding. We continue to build more prisons. That's the goal, rather than having more humane
1 minute.
objectives, more humane sentencing, and more humane programming, so that these people come out of the prisons better people. And the fundamentalists are coming forward and saying people are redeemable. And these decisions that we continue to make to be tough on crime is not smart on crime. And all the countries doing this, Texas, Louisiana, all the conservative states are doing this, but Nebraska is still stuck back in, oh, if we aren't tough on crime, if we don't continue our ridiculous efforts at just building more prisons and not resentencing and not helping with programming, we're not accomplishing anything. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Pansing Brooks. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to stand up and discuss. You'll see on the committee statement that I was a no vote on this bill. And it's not that I didn't want to pass the entire budget, but there were items in there that I did not support. But I do want to tell you a few of the things I do support that are important items. And so I'm glad that it has proceeded this far. You'll see LB 788 is the Nebraska Rural Projects Act. It doesn't describe it very well, but it's really the bill which will help North Platte build a rail yard, which will really help West Central Nebraska. We'll call it West Central Nebraska. And LB 989, Medicaid nursing facility rates. I had a call this week from a nursing facility, and they are really hurting. Their Medicaid reimbursement is well below their cost. And then the Perkins County Canal Project. I was glad that we were able to fund that project so that the flows from the South Platte River into Nebraska can be protected. I appreciated the governor's strategy on that part. And this Strategic Air Command Nuclear Command Facility, I think is important. I hadn't appreciated so much the development of Offutt Air Force Base, some of those developments, but in debate here, I think I have come to appreciate that that will be a benefit for Nebraska. The one item that I was involved with was the Lake Development Act, LB 1023, and that's improvements at Lake McConaughey around Ogallala, and then up at Niobrara and Lewis and Clark Lake in Knox County. Then the lake project here and the flood control on the Platte River. There was a couple of concerns there. Would Speaker Hilgers be available for a question?
Speaker Hilgers, would you yield?
I would.
Yes, well, regarding the JEDI project, we call it, Water Resources Project, I see in the bill, it has a phrase, primary purposes of providing flood control, but I've had constituents who saying that's not really part of it. What do you think? What would you describe the flood control purpose?
Well, thank you, Senator Clemens, for the question. So when people think of the lake and the way that we've spoken about it, we've talked about it in the context of economic development and recreation. I will say when we looked at that language that you're referring to, we looked to strike it actually in light of some of the comments that we also received. We did speak to our consultant HDR who did the preliminary hydrology study, and they said there actually are flood control benefits. I'd have to defer you to them in order to properly answer that specific question, or I can get it for you and come back on the mic.
Okay, thank you. Then one of the large concerns from a landowner that called me was granting all power necessary to carry out the purposes and purchasing land. Does that include eminent domain?
1 minute.
Which portion are you referring to? The Department of Natural Resources does not get eminent domain authority under LB 1023.
Well, it talks about natural resource districts may use their full powers.
Well, NRDs already have eminent domain authority, if that's your question. But the bigger picture, Senator Clemens, is the entire intent and approach on this is arm's length, win-win-win transactions, and not to use eminent domain to take people's property.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Speaker Hilgers. Well, I am going to vote yes on the bill. The one thing I would have that I was disappointed about the tax package, and that we do have still $439 million of excess budget, and I hope that we can come to an agreement on giving some of that back to our taxpayers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements and Speaker Hilgers. Senator Hunt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraskans. I rise in opposition to this motion to bracket, and I will be supporting LB 1011. And this morning, since I got here, I observed something out in the rotunda that was very special. And one of the most special things that many students experience in Nebraska in their younger years is coming to the Capitol from all over the state, sometimes, on a bus for hours to come to a field trip and get to see their state capitol. And for many of these kids, this is the closest they've gotten to any interaction with government, to any kind of civic engagement. And these are the kinds of things that we are always encouraging schools to do and always encouraging students to be involved with. It's really the beginning of the watchfulness of the citizen, right? Is when the fourth graders come up and sit in this balcony and look over us, and it hopefully dawns on them and occurs to them that even though, we're a lot older people down here, that we are for them, and this government is for them, and that we are not above them. They're literally above us, looking down on us. And that's a habit that I hope will continue for them throughout their lives, whether as Nebraskans or wherever it is that they go move. And one of the most special things that they can do in the Capitol is get the tour, right? And we love seeing the children out in the rotunda, sitting in a circle in the rotunda under the dome, learning about the symbolism of the mosaic on the floor, telling the story of evolution, learning the symbolism of the chandeliers above them and the beautiful mosaics and the quotes about government and equity and justice that line the ceiling. And this morning, the children that were here visiting the Capitol did not get to have that opportunity. They didn't get to have that experience because something else was going on out in the rotunda. Chuck Herbster having another press conference and political rally for his campaign for governor. Reasonable people can agree that that's wrong, that this building is for everybody, that these children should not be denied the opportunity to appreciate their state capitol so that a man in a cowboy hat wearing a suit that costs more than my car can come displace children that are here to learn about their state so that he can have a political rally. Reasonable people can agree that that's not in the best interest of trusting government or the purpose of this institution. And I think that we need to look at a serious rule change, culture change. Does this need to come from the executive board? I don't know, but we need to prevent political rallies from happening in the rotunda. I don't like it no matter what, and I, capital H, hate it when it happens and displaces children from the rotunda, students who come here from all over the state, driving for hours in some cases, to learn about this beautiful building. And they don't get to see the chandelier, they don't get to see the ceiling and the mosaics, they get to see a political rally. That is not what government is about. And that's not what civic education should be about. There are agreements that reasonable people can come to. And it concerns me to see a lack of moderation in this body. And this is me saying this, right? It concerns me to see a lack of moderation in government.
1 minute.
Man, I've got a lot more than a minute to say. Moderation is when reasonable people can agree on something. Whether we're talking about children using litter boxes in schools, which reasonable people can agree is not happening in schools in Nebraska, in rural Nebraska. It's not happening. Be reasonable. Or whether we're talking about banning abortion with no exception for rape or incest or for the life of the mother or anything, reasonable people can agree that's absurd. Or we're talking about banning teachers from teaching about the good and the bad and the ugly of the history of this country. Reasonable people can agree that that makes no sense. Passing tax cuts that we can afford this year when we have a ton of extra revenue, but will not be sustainable over time for revenue in this state. Reasonable people can agree that that doesn't make sense. We got to walk it back. We're doing some extreme things.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Senator Matt Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. And since we've gotten to it already, I was going to dive in and talk about the tax bill. And I understand this bill is now linked to the tax bill in its own way. I just want to push back, and this might be the only time I get to talk about it this morning. I just want to push back on any sort of this continuing narrative that the tax plan, including the bill that we were talking about on Friday, is about average Nebraskans or everyday Nebraskans. And to do that, I'm going to hold myself up as an example. So my wife and I are a young couple in our mid-30s, married for a few years, own a home. In that tax bill, we would not have qualified for Social Security. We're about 30 years too early. We would not have qualified for the corporate income tax. We don't own a corporate income tax. We would not have qualified for the individual income tax because we don't make enough, but we would qualify for some of the property tax components. So that's the one component of that multi-component bill that would apply to my family individually. Now, I don't have to benefit from a bill to be able to vote for it, but every time somebody gets up on this microphone and explains that I don't understand what like young working couples income means, are talking about cutting taxes for people who aren't me. And so just factor that into your floor speeches from now on, from going on. So again, the only one my wife and I would individually benefit from were the property tax cuts, which if we were renters like so many of our friends and so many of our peers are, we wouldn't even get that. There are a huge swath of young families, millennial families, all sorts of people who aren't included in that tax bill. Now, again, I can support bills and I can support concepts that I won't personally benefit from. I was a co-sponsor of the Social Security repeal, and that's not something I'm going to benefit from in decades, but I thought that was good policy. I supported the military retirement tax breaks because it's something I will never benefit from because I thought that was good policy. But when you want to get up and talk about how average everyday Nebraskans are getting it, you're talking about people on this floor who aren't even necessarily going to benefit from that tax bill or benefit from the tax bill in the way that you are saying so. That's the reality of what we're talking about. And if we're kind of speaking to the public, telling them to call on elected officials, I mean, throw it right back at you. Have people call in, ask your state senator what your tax break under that bill would have been. If you're a renter, if you're not in the highest income bracket or not sure if you're in the highest income bracket, like check, ask, because odds are it doesn't apply to you at all. With that, Mr. President, I'll yield the balance of my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, you are yielded 220.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Hansen, thank you for the time. I want to visit a little bit about, just to step back, I'm going to make this observation. I've been talking about this thing for about 25 hours now, myself along with others, which I appreciate. But this is the first time I've had a full house, and it might have something to do with being on final reading. So many of you have not had an opportunity to hit your light and ask me questions. If you have a question about any part of the solution to the problem we have over at the Department of Corrections, I'm happy to stand here and answer those. I'm happy to answer any question you may have about the particulars of LB 920. I'm happy to talk to you about corrections. I've been on this issue for 12 years and intensely on it for the last 9 months. So number one, I'm happy to talk about it. Number two, what we're talking about, colleagues, has been done in many, many conservative states. This movement of being smart on crime, checking for how do we best use taxpayer dollars to better ensure public safety.
1 minute.
I said better ensure public safety, is a conservative movement. It's coming from people like the Koch brothers, like Alec. Those groups are the ones that are behind the movement to be smart on crime, to enhance public safety with these kinds of measures, to better spend the taxpayer dollar where we know the investment will lead to lower rates of recidivism, where that investment will lead to better public safety. This is about public safety. It's about public safety. It's a conservative principle. And I have to tell you, I'm struggling. I'm struggling because in 12 years, am I next in the queue, Mr. President?
1 minute.
Am I next in the queue as well?
Yes, you are. You may continue.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm struggling because I don't remember a time in 12 years where we have not identified a significant problem facing the state, and you can't find people that can sit down and agree or get to yes on what the solution should look like. And my only explanation is concern over the politics of it. And I have to tell you, this is about enhancing public safety. There's nothing soft about this. This is about having people on parole for a longer period of time, having that guy that moves back to your community being overseen by a parole officer, having them accountable. By the way, parolees don't like that parole officer process, right? They'd rather get out and not be accountable, not be subject to drug tests, not have somebody tell you who you can hang around with and not hang around with, not having a law enforcement officer be able to go through your car, having an ankle monitor on to ensure that you are abiding by the terms of your parole. This is enhancing public safety that we're talking about. And now many of you, this is the first time you've been on the floor during these discussions, and I would encourage you to ask questions, encourage you to talk about the topic and any concerns you may have, so at least I can address them. Where I find myself is unable to find somebody that can get to yes, and no one standing up and asking an intelligent or any question. I appreciate Senator Mosier asking a question this morning. If you have concerns, let's hear about them. Maybe they're well-founded, maybe they're not well-founded, or maybe there's a solution. Yesterday, Senator McKinney and I spent some time trying to explain the bill and offer opportunities to enhance it or make people more comfortable. We found ourselves bidding against ourselves, to be very honest, but let me tell you what sort of the vision is, if you will. We have two pieces in this bill that would allow someone to become parole eligible sooner. And I said this earlier, the sooner someone gets parole, the longer they're going to be watched or overseen by a parole officer. Our vision with this is not to simply let people out earlier, but Senator McDonald and I have been working on another project, something that we saw over in Iowa called a halfway back house. In a halfway back house, people who have technical violations of parole, they don't report on the right time, they're a day late reporting, or maybe they have fail a drug test. Something that happens when you're following a parolee. We would have a facility that those people can be brought back to. We call it a halfway back house. This is a concept they use over in Iowa. Senator McDonald and I and some others, Mike Friend, some of you may know, a former colleague and now a county commissioner, we went over and looked at this halfway back facility. This is a really good idea for some people who are coming from the Department of Corrections out. They have all this freedom, all the temptations, and some of them need to be brought back to something more structured. Maybe they need a little more substance abuse treatment. There is a plan in this bill. There is a vision in this bill. It's having people have an opportunity
1 minute.
for parole sooner and expanding our capacity to take care of the people who are struggling while they're on parole, put them in a more structured environment, much like work release, where they get treatment, they get counseling, they get mental health care, and they're accountable to somebody. They have to check in every day and sleep at a halfway back facility. What problem do you possibly have with that? What problem do you have with that? If you have a problem, turn your light on and ask me about it. How much time do I have?
20 seconds.
Next time I get on the mic, I'll tell you about the other changes that Senator McKinney and I proposed yesterday so that you know kind of we've made a good faith effort to try to move towards some consensus, and we are challenged by not being able to get to someone who can say yes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Lathrop. Senator Linehan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So again, I'm going to talk about the bill. So I don't know how many of you have it up, but if you go to page 84, section 262, it's the bottom of the page. So one of my children gave me the autobiography by George W. Norris, which I read last summer. And we talk a lot, I don't so much, I'll admit that, about George Norris and nonpartisanship. But I read his autobiography, and what he didn't like more than anything else, and why he wanted one house, it did away with the conference committees. So the conference committees are like this. The House in all other states and in DC. The lower house passes a bill, the upper house passes a bill, a bunch of people go in a room, close the door, kick the press out, and they write the law. And if you're not in the room, you don't know exactly what happened, you don't know who traded what, you don't know who was doing what. So when George Norris set up a one-house legislature, his main point was sunshine, openness. Everybody has to know what everybody's doing. So we have rules. We have rules on exec committee. There's an exception. I've used it once where the press is not in the executive committee. But only once, and it was because it was personality conflicts, had nothing to do with legislation. And it was only for like 15 minutes. I have always had them in the room. They need to be in the room. We also have record votes. So I'm a chairman. We have a very wonderful revenue committee, but I've got 2 ag producers. I've got rural, I've got urban, I've got chambers of commerce. I've got the whole deal. We are good representation. Some of our more senior members to some of our youngest members. We rarely have, I shouldn't say rarely, but we have a lot of 5-3, 6-2, 4-4 votes. But the press is right there. Not only is the press right there, but there's a committee statement if it gets out of committee on every vote. So here's my question. I'll talk about one other member. Senator Chambers always said that he read every bill before it came to the floor. I've learned there's some tricks to that because there's no way you have time to read every bill. But you kind of read the first few pages so you get an idea of what's going on, and then you flip toward the end. Because if a committee wants to hide something, it's toward the end of the bill. So let's set this up. This isn't about this bill so much, but let's talk about the ARPA thing that went on, bill that was here yesterday. If I understand, and somebody can correct me here, the governor did not have to ask us about the ARPA money. He could have spent all of it, $1 billion, however he wanted to, without coming to the legislature. That was his prerogative. But in this bill, on page 84, it says, starting on line 23, any federal funds not otherwise appropriated, any additional federal funds made available to the director of the state treasurer, and any amounts on hand in such federal funds on 30 June 2021, underlined, new language, excluding any funds allocated to the state of Nebraska from the federal coronavirus state fiscal recovery fund pursuant to the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. So if I understand this language right, the governor, trusting us,
1 minute.
said he would work in partnership, and as partners, we took his ability away. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. I had some other things to say, but I think I will hold on to them for later in the day. So I will yield the remainder of my time to Senator Lathrop if he would like it.
Senator Lathrop, 4 minutes, 40 seconds.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. President and Senator Kavanaugh. I got to make sure my phone's, the ringer's turned off. It keeps dinging at me. I want to tell you a story, because we're here and we're apparently concerned about how is a vote on 920 going to be interpreted. And I was here some years ago, and a bill came along that allowed for prenatal care for everyone, no exclusions for someone whose immigration status was undocumented. That bill came to the floor. I think Senator Campbell may have introduced it. By the way, Senator Campbell, one of the most courageous members of this body in the time I've been here. That bill came to the floor, and it was about providing care to an unborn child. A child that when they came and drew their first breath, they would be an American. And Governor Heineman at the time called it a giveaway to illegals, and the pro-life community called it a pro-life bill. How is this thing going to be messaged once the vote was over? That was difficult, particularly if you were a registered Republican. And this is the drum that Governor Heineman liked to beat frequently. And that bill passed. It passed because it was the right thing to do. It was the right thing to do. And I can tell you, I was there, I was in the middle of it, and so was Senator Flood. Speaker Flood was in the middle of it too. We knew that that was going to be messaged in a certain way. In his primary race right now, it's being messaged in that way as a giveaway to illegals. It was, in my race the last time, it was Lathrop voted to give public benefits to illegals. You know, at some point, my friends, at some point, we have to recognize the issues in front of us, decide what the right thing to do is, and have the courage to do it. That was a courageous vote, in my estimation, by Senator Flood and everybody else, including me, that took that vote, because the criticism was withering. And it had a long tail that's still following some of us around. But it was the right thing to do. And we are called to do the right thing. And if we stand here and spend all of our time worried about how something's going to be messaged, if we vote one way or the other, we are missing the opportunity. You will all be term limited, as I have been, and you will look back and reflect on your time here. You will look back and reflect on your time here, and I can just tell you, the only regrets you will have is when you didn't have the courage to do the right thing.
1 minute.
Because that's what's happening right now. My friend Senator Lindstrom's being hammered for a vote on gas tax. We got to pave some roads around here. He had the courage of his convictions. Will it happen? It might. But at the end of the day, if we're nothing else, we got to be problem solvers and come here with the courage to do the right thing. I need somebody to talk to about 920. If you got a problem with 920, tell me what it is. But don't just sit in your chair and wait till somebody tells you what to do, or what the messaging people are telling you what to do, or the campaign managers are telling you what to do, because this is a big problem. It's a fiscal problem. You need $1 billion worth of corrections in the next 20 years.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Friesen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. That was an appropriate lead-in. Now, I've talked about school funding for 8 years. Nothing's happened. We've tried. blocked every time. Tough subject. Nobody wants to talk about it. 175 schools get no state aid to speak of. It was a big issue to my constituents. It's a big issue for rural Nebraska. We've gotten nowheres. I've always been able to sit down with people and try to reach a consensus, but not on school funding. We've worked through a lot of other issues on broadband and transportation issues. But no, a lot of kids don't deserve state aid for schools. And I've made the comment that in the last couple of years, I've learned that facts don't matter, and find a hostage, and Senator Lathrop has done that too. I don't blame him for it. He's got a huge issue that nobody will listen. No different than a rural senator. Down the road, that's going to be the only tool we have. It'll just get more and more that way until we get rid of term limits or do something where we can have some institutional consistency here, where we have people who really want to fix a problem. And right now, it's just a lot of people posturing for re-election or election to a higher office or who knows what. I just want to go home in 10 days. We've finally got lots of revenue, and we just want to spend it. And I'm not even talking about the prisons. We've gotten projects, long lists of projects, and we will spend it. And then come some years from now, if we refuse to give any back to the taxpayer, which I'm hoping we can still get done, I'm not giving up, we still won't have fixed our school funding problem, but we'll have at least set aside some money that I hope somebody in this body can take the lead and get some funding for those rural schools. I'm not holding my breath. I'm sure they'll be talking about prison reform after Senator Lathrop's gone. Sooner or later, something's going to have to be addressed. I'm not disagreeing with him. The only way to get people's attention is to hold something hostage in this body. And again, facts usually don't matter. It's how you drive the narrative. We
1 minute.
rarely have a long-term picture of what we want the state to look like. We're very short-sighted. We have, for years, decades, ignored the fact that rural Nebraska is shrinking. We don't address it in our tax policy. Everybody's just okay with it. As long as Omaha can build a streetcar, use tax increment financing on billions of dollars of property, their schools will get funded with state aid, and ours won't. And we'll keep doing the same thing over and over. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator McCollister, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning again, colleagues. One of my favorite quotes, and I think I followed it during my time in the legislature, is from Edmund Burke. Let me read that quote to you. Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment, and he betrays instead of serving you if he sacrifices it to your opinion. I think that's what I've done this 8 years in the legislature. I made a lot of tough votes, helped folks overcome vetoes. I suppose the governor has vetoed more of my bills than anybody else. And it's always been my rule that you're here for 8 years, but this job isn't worth you betraying your conscience if you can't vote according to your mind and your conscience. So I'm happy to be here, and I feel when I leave, I will have left nothing behind. We always look to the tax foundation to figure out where Nebraska lies in the scale of states in terms of income tax, property tax, and income taxes. Well, what does Nebraska? If you take Nebraska's tax collections as a whole, our Nebraska collections per capita are $2,986, $2,986. Iowa, $3,342. So Iowa actually on a per capita basis charges more taxes than Nebraska. Minnesota, high, $4,695. Missouri, 2016, it's low. North Dakota, get this, $5,566. Colorado, fairly low, $2,611. I think Nebraska, when you look at our overall tax structure, we don't get credit for the property tax relief funds that we pay. It doesn't show up in the tax foundation's summaries. And I think we all know that sales tax, we have such a narrow sales tax. Many states, including Tennessee, have broadened their sales tax to include services and have been able to use the revenue generated to adjust income tax and income tax primarily. That's how it goes. I agree with Senator Linehan and Senator Breese. We do need a tax package. I recognize Nebraska's income tax don't compare favorably with our neighbors. We need to deal with that, but we also need to deal with giving people in the middle income range some help as well. More property tax. We still need to do more. As I start thinking about going door to door for my next election, I'll be asked those questions from people. What did we accomplish in 2022? What did we accomplish? And I hope we can speak of not only tax reform, but also criminal justice reform. That's important to me as well. Yes, we'll have to have a combination of bills together, the grand package. And I would like to see that include tax reform and criminal justice reform. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moorfeld, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I want to get up and talk a little bit about LB 825 and some of the comments that were made on that legislation in particular. So first off, a lot of people have gotten up and said, I can't believe that there are some people that were present not voting on Social Security income tax exemption. And the bottom line is that people were present not voting because it was hijacked at the last minute. It was hijacked at the last minute. All of the people getting up and saying that know it full well that it was a last minute cheap political trick where they attached an amendment that not even the people pushing LB 825 knew was coming. And the reason why myself and many other people were present not voting is because it was a cheap political trick to attach a totally separate package to try to get people on the record to then go attack them in their elections. And everybody who orchestrated that should be ashamed of themselves. The reason why people did not vote on that was because that was not the bill that the vast majority of people unanimously supported on general file. It was a cheap political trick. The people that orchestrated know it. And then they flooded the queue to just get up and say, well, if you don't vote for this, you're not voting for seniors, even though we know that there was about $900 million in other tax giveaways for mostly folks that were wealthy. I'm not going to play into those tricks, and I'm not going to be trapped by it. And also, I know a lot of our constituents know better. A lot of the seniors that were advocating on that bill were urging us to vote no on that cheap trick and that amendment that you put on that bill at the last minute that you didn't even inform the advocates who brought you the bill about. I'm not going to play your games. And that's what that is. It was a cheap trick. It was a game. And it was well orchestrated. I'll give you that. But I'm also not going to be a part of it. I'm in support of exempting Social Security from income tax. I'm almost positive I was a co-sponsor of the bill. I think it was last year or the year before. And I voted in support on general file along with 42 other people. Until people decided to play cheap political games and attach a wholly different amendment with about $900 million in more unsustainable tax breaks. I'm not just concerned about the legislature now. I'm not just concerned about the state right now. I'm concerned about what the legislature and the state looks like 2 to 3 years from now. That's my responsibility as a responsible lawmaker. And yes, we might be flush with cash right now because of a historic federal relief package and a bunch of other things, but we know that we're not going to be likely 2 to 3 years from now. And so I'm worried about creating structural deficits that my colleagues have to go and deal with 2 or 3 years from now. And then there'll be a bunch of the people, some of the same people who orchestrated that, going, oh, no, can't increase taxes. But you know what we need to do? We need to cut K through 12 education because times are tough. That's what happens every single time. So when folks get up on the mic and say, oh, God, golly gee, I just can't even believe there was a bunch of people present not voting on LB 825, like what a shame. Yeah, it was because of a trick that you or some of your friends decided to orchestrate at the last minute. And we all know it. And Nebraskans should know it. It was cheap, it was underhanded, and that's the reason why LB 825 did not advance. And that's on you. That's your fault. Not the people that all supported that bill that you decided to hijack. And I was going to yield time to Senator Hunt, but I needed to say what I was going to say, and I don't have any time left. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Moser, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. A couple of things I wanted to talk about. The budget is my second thing. First thing I want to talk about is the refundable tax credit that you can claim on your Nebraska income tax forms this year. I had a friend I talked to over the weekend, and he neglected to apply for his refundable tax credit on his school portion of his property tax. And I helped him kind of figure it out, and it was going to save him about $350. So I just wanted to remind people to, if you're using a professional tax preparer, chances are they're going to catch this. But if you do your own, or if you use some of the online tax preparing software, sometimes it doesn't pop up. But on line 36, there's an amount to put in, and you fill out a form called your PTC, property tax credit form. You go online to look up your property tax that you paid for your schools. You can Google it and find it. You find your county, you find your parcel numbers, you put in your parcel numbers. It'll print out a form. Then you print that form out and you put 25% of it on line 36. And even if you didn't make any money, you can still get a refund. If you filed already and you need to amend your return, you can, I think, and get that money back. Even last year, I think, I'm getting myself into dangerous territory. I'm not a tax preparer, but I think you can go back a certain number of years and amend your return if you made a mistake. So those are things that I wanted to remind citizens about, make sure they claim that credit. As long as we're talking about tax credits and reducing taxes. I was wondering if Senator Stinner would respond to a couple of questions.
Senator Stinner, will you yield?
Yes, I will.
Do you have line item veto in the budget?
Do I? No.
So do you have to put things, or do you put things in there that you personally are not excited about?
Yes,
So you understand some of the angst of having the budget all kind of put together and it comes to the floor, and when we change it, it starts messing up the plan?
well, the committee process that we go through, I think I've explained before, and when we come to the floor, I feel pretty strongly all of these items have been appropriately vetted. There's hearings and certainly consultation with the fiscal staff. So we get a lot of information before we come with our recommendation.
Yes, and I appreciate the work that you do. You spend an awful lot of time going through the budget to make sure that it's as good as you can get it, and we appreciate that. But this is our chance to talk about it a little bit today, and so that's why I've been talking about it. Thank you, Senator Stinner.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Moser and Stinner. Senator Hunt, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm glad Senator Moorfeld said all that because I think there was a lot of confusion among Nebraskans about what really happened with that tax cut vote. And again, this goes to my point about being reasonable. I want to cut taxes for Nebraskans. I want middle class, working Nebraskans to pay less in taxes. I want them to pay less in property taxes. And in addition to that benefit, I want to make sure that they have good schools. I want to make sure that when and if a pandemic hits or some other kind of disaster, that if they find themselves out of work and system involved for the first time in their lives, that they can get food assistance, they can get rental assistance. Colleagues, helping our neighbors doesn't begin and end with tax credits or tax cuts or taxes at all. It's part of the solution. It's part of the solution. And when you come up with a really reasonable idea to cut taxes like Social Security taxes, I completely supported that bill. I voted for that bill on every round, and I have in the past. But then at the very 11th hour, you slip in an amendment that's like, oh, and then the ultra wealthy and corporations, we're going to give them nearly $1 billion in tax credits too. Like, why do you think that it's unreasonable that that's something we oppose? When you want to put that in, but looking at the entire smorgasbord of different things we can do to help Nebraskans with their problems, you don't say, oh, also food security we can address, also education quality we can address, also rental assistance, which Nebraska is poised to be the only state in the country that's not accepting federal rental assistance, which let me tell you, the Nebraskan taxpayers are paying for. You want taxpayers to pay for rental assistance for 49 other states? And then you yell at me when I don't want to give nearly $1 billion in tax cuts to corporations and wealthy Nebraskans? Reasonable people can agree that's absurd. Anyway, if I was Chuck Herbster and I was out there in the rotunda in my cowboy hat and my suit, think he's ever roped a bull? Whatever, get out of here. If I was Chuck Herbster out there and I was having my campaign rally in the rotunda of the state capitol, and I saw this group of 75 fourth graders pass through and have to sit way off to the side, and they didn't have the opportunity to lay on their backs in the rotunda, in the circle underneath the rotunda, and look up at the wonderful Native American history we have depicted up in the ceiling, the wonderful art and culture that we have depicted in the symbolism of this capitol, that is a huge purpose of the reason kids come here to see this beautiful building, this beautiful historic building. If I was Chuck Herbster and I saw that my campaign rally was the reason these children didn't get to do that, I think I'd die of embarrassment. People have no humility, people have no shame, and people have no rational reason. Why are we doing such extreme things? Building more prison capacity without putting reforms in place to prevent overcrowding from continuing. Reasonable people can agree that's absurd. Saying that Nebraskans who are eligible for food assistance should not be able to apply because they committed a nonviolent drug crime decades ago. Reasonable people can agree that's absurd. Saying that tipped workers in Nebraska should earn $2.13 an hour but then do nothing to combat wage theft in this state is absurd. A grown billionaire adult having a campaign rally in a government building,
1 minute.
displacing classrooms of fourth graders is absurd. No reasonable Republican, from my dad in Blair, Nebraska to your dad, around this state, would think that that makes sense if he heard that was going on. Whether you're conservative or progressive or Republican, I'm a sixth-generation Nebraskan. I'm from here big time. I come from here deep. Nobody in my family would think that makes sense. The way you all are out of touch with Nebraskans reflects the type of people that we elect to this legislature, right? It can only be people who can basically afford not to work, who are independently wealthy, or who have a spouse that can support them, or who are retired, or who are very young and, don't
Senator.
really care if they don't get health insurance. Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator DeBoer, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. This morning, I had the opportunity to give the prayer for all of us, and I remember praying about grace and softening our hearts. And then just now, my anger was getting up as I was hearing some of the conversation, and I realized that I probably need to moderate my tone. And so I have some things to say. I'll come back on the microphone and say them in a little bit. But until I can moderate my tone, I think I will yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 4 minute 20.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator DeBoer. Colleagues, I want to ask a question. This is a serious question. When you look at the information I provided you about our population and our capacity, when you look at that, it's plainly obvious to anyone looking at it that the state of Nebraska has a problem with capacity, and that the proposal to build 1,500 beds doesn't even come close to answering that. So what's your solution? What bill do you want to pass this year? What bill do you want to amend into 920 that solves the problem? What's your answer? What do you want to do? Why is it that we're just okay kicking a problem down the road again and not solving the problem? So tell me, hit your light and jump up. Tell me, what bill do you want us to pass that fixes the problem? What's your idea? What's your idea? Senator McKinney and I have spent 9 months working on the CJI process. It's actually getting closer to a year now that the session's moving along, and they came up with consensus items and non-consensus items. I will tell you, the consensus items that are being peddled as the solution don't do anything. They don't solve that problem. They do not solve the problem. So what's the solution? We just message it. Let's say that that's the solution and pretend it does something to solve a problem. It doesn't. It does not. I've given you charts, I've given you graphs, I've given you 27 hours of explanation, and everybody just sits there waiting for the hours to pass, not looking for a solution, but waiting for the text that tells them what to do next. What should I do? I got to wait till I get a text. Who's going to email me direction on this one? I guess we're against it. I'm not really sure why, but we're against it. Text back when you get that one. What's the solution? What's the answer? If it's not 920, tell me what your idea is. Sit there waiting for a text or an email. Oh, the governor just sent something out. Now we got some direction. 2 weeks ago, I saw the problem that we are experiencing now. Things are getting balled up. The tax bill, There should be a way forward for that tax bill. The ARPA bill, that should move. 920 should move. The solution and the way forward is obvious.
1 minute.
But gee, get caught up in this situation where somebody could say we're soft on crime. We'll just not solve the problem, and then no one can accuse us of something. It makes no sense. It is cowardice. And when somebody tells you that the consensus items are smart on crime and they solve the problem, it's nonsense. It doesn't. There's data to support that it makes virtually no difference. It allows us to put out the mission accomplished banner and get on with building more prison beds and getting on a path that is not sustainable. You want to be fiscal conservatives, you want to do tax cuts. Here is a money suck that we're getting into. This is going to be a black hole we
Senator.
throw money in for years.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Matt Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, colleagues. Good morning, colleagues. Just feels like afternoon. I just want to rise, and I guess if we're talking kind of holistically about many of the last few years, we've done significant work on a lot of issues. And I appreciate that not everybody who's in my class, not everybody who's being termed out or choosing not to run for election accomplished all of their legislative priorities. I certainly, you can just even see this year, I had bills that I would have liked to get across the finish line that are going to sit in general file for want of a priority. And that's kind of the one of the things that's probably hardest to come to terms with in terms of being termed out the legislatures. I think in many issues I've worked and I have people who are less senior than me who are interested and going to carry those forward. So I feel optimistic about that. Which I bring up to say, when we talk about what we've done or what the body hasn't done and all these things, you know, it's been said that the kind of like the body hasn't addressed property taxes or hasn't addressed school funding. I was just reminding and thinking here, I have the headline from the LB 1107 signing. This was the World Herald, but Governor Ricketts signs compromise tax bill, says it's, quote, giant step, end quote, for property tax relief. I understand that 1107 wasn't going to be the end of everything. I did support 1107. That is something we as a body did less than 2 years ago that was hailed as kind of one of the biggest tax changes of a generation. So to get up and say that this isn't something the body's worked with or nobody's willing to negotiate or nobody's willing to work on, to me isn't true, because we have the verifiable proof. You know, there was a big press conference and signing ceremony in the steps of the Capitol celebrating this tax package that we did again in 2020, in August of 2020. And I bring all that up to say is I understand that we have to keep working on issues, and I understand that just because we pass one bill 1 year probably doesn't ever put an issue truly to bed. Maybe a niche enough issue, maybe a specific enough component, sure. But I understand that regardless of what tax bill we pass this year, we're not going to not pass a tax bill next year, or there's not at least going to be a strong push to push similar tax bills next year, on and on. Same on school funding, same on all sorts of education policy, same on healthcare policy. I understand. That's the ongoing nature of a legislature. That's our duty as a body, to continue to support and continue to promote kind of the growing and changing needs and perspectives of Nebraskans. But again, I just wanted to kind of put up and push this pushback that there hasn't been a willingness on this body to do things on taxes. There has been. We've done a ton. I'm appreciative of the people who have reached out and worked to me when we've worked on issues. I want to appreciate Senator Coulterman worked with me a ton on LB 720, the Imagine Nebraska Act, that ultimately got rolled into 1107 on wages and benefits. And there was a considerable portion of that bill that I helped steer, again, granted just on the wages and benefits part, but I felt that I had an opportunity to negotiate, to say my preferences, to have somebody in the room respond back on, you know, where the areas of compromise, where the areas of negotiation could be or would be, and we could go from there. So that's the things we can do and accomplish in this legislature. And I think 1107 does show that we have, and there are many of us who have had the strong commitment. Again, just like the military retirement, the first half of Social Security, there's been all sorts of things, including just the last, I'm citing this the last 2.5 years, not to mention everything we've done over the full course of my 8. Talking about the size of the property tax credit fund we have in Nebraska, and that's in rival in size to TIOSA.
1 minute.
So to talk about it as not being something significant that we've done over a 10-year, I think doesn't do it justice. We talk about this, and we often talk about this notion of giving people back their own money. Again, sometimes when we're inventing these messy and I will take messy back. Sometimes when we're inventing these credit systems, especially for the property tax credit, we have to remember that we're taking people's sales and income taxes and giving them back to property tax credit via the income tax rebate or via direct payments to the county treasurer. That's not necessarily always giving people their own money back. And that's an extra complicated layer when we routinely say property taxes are the state's #1 issue, which is this tax the state itself does not collect. And I know that's a repeatable point and something we've covered for many years, but that's the kind of one of the ongoing struggles with all this. So we have worked on taxes. I've worked on taxes. All of us have worked on taxes over this time.
Time, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Before we continue, Senator Brandt would like to welcome 75 fourth grade students from Crete Intermediate School in Nebraska. They're seated in the north balcony. Students, if you would rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Lathrop, you are recognized. This is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. After I got done speaking the last time, I thought about Senator DeBoer's words. I might have been down in my office during the prayer and missed it. It's always advisable for me to recognize that as strongly as I feel about something, I also got to be mindful of my tone. I also want to say something else, and that is, I'm speaking about this issue, and I feel like I've been maybe a little more broad in my remarks than I should have been or intended to be. There are a lot of people on this floor that have told me they support 920, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that very much. For those of you who have recognized the issue and recognized 920 as a solution, I very much appreciate your support and your willingness to stay with me. I'm not trying to be offensive in my remarks. I am, however, trying to make a point. And so while I was speaking a moment ago, somebody forwarded me a copy of a press thing that the governor sent out. And it's like, time to get this taken care of and no more antics or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. And then he covered a couple of things that we took care of yesterday, right? Like, you don't get 10 possession of a controlled substances and still get a misdemeanor. That was an offer we made yesterday. I think he was out of town or something, or perhaps that was never communicated or whatever. Fentanyl. He talked about fentanyl. That's in the amendment. It's out. It's excluded. I have a number of things that Senator McKinney and I and others were willing to concede to change. We just can't get in the room with somebody that'll talk to us about it, or that can get to yes, or that can appreciate that the middle is the middle on some of these proposals and not take the consensus items because they are more in number. Now, there was a group of people that met and came up with a bunch of consensus items. Let's have assistant probation officers. Let's have more problem-solving courts. Let's do gift cards to people on probation. Let's do incentives. Let's do this and let's do that. And who can be against that? Go ahead and get gift cards for people on probation, because we know if you give them gift cards and you give them some positive strokes, that's better than trying to, hold the stick over them and offer them a carrot once in a while. Okay, but that doesn't move the needle on the population, and it doesn't solve the problem. It's a talking point. It's a talking point because there are more of them than the ones that actually do make a difference, and they ended up in the non-consensus column. They're the things that I've talked about relative to parole and consecutive sentences and the like. This will be my last opportunity to speak after this, Mr. Speaker. If you want to go to cloture, I don't have a problem with it. I'm looking for, as the speaker once said, you're looking for a dance partner. I'm looking for a dance partner. Somebody that'll sit down and recognize that there's a way forward on the rest of the session. There's a way forward on 920. And for the life of me, I don't know why we're so resistant to it. It's not like I'm
1
making up
minute.
a problem, trying to create a problem and get you to buy into it. It's obvious. And we're going to be spending money on this stuff to the exclusion of whatever you care about in the budget, because it's going to eat us alive. And then when the people that come behind us don't want to raise the revenue to deal with the cost of all this stuff, then we're going to start cutting education or cutting the things that you care about, or the property tax relief fund. This thing's a ticking time bomb. It's a ticking time bomb, and it's going off right in front of us. And we're trying to figure out, how do we avoid dealing with it, because somebody might call us soft on crime. Makes no sense. Makes no sense. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Linehan, you are recognized. This is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't hardly ever do this, but I'm going to call a penalty flag. Senator Lathrop has said several times this morning he hasn't talked to anybody that can get to yes. He has spent hours in the room with Senator Suzanne Geist. I don't know what that means. Suzanne has my complete confidence. I'm pretty sure she has administration's confidence. I'm not only my understanding, I wasn't in the room, was fine. This is not my deal, not my subject matter. Suzanne Geist is on the Judiciary Committee. Suzanne Geist is on the committee. She too has worked on this ever since they had the committee meetings on this. It's not only, in my understanding, what I was told yesterday, Suzanne Geist was in the room with not only Senator Lathrop, but Senator McDonald and Senator McKinney. Sounds like she held her own. That doesn't mean she can't get to yes. That means she held her own. With that, I'll yield the rest of my time to Senator Slama.
Senator Slama, 3:37.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning, colleagues. I rise with Senator Linehan's same thoughts on this discussion and some of the malarkey that's being thrown about how no one wants to work with us, no one wants to negotiate. Are you kidding me? Senator Suzanne Geist has been negotiating this for 9 months, and we can't even bother to mention that she's on the CJI committee and contributed to this. And when we're saying we're looking for dance partners, that's code for we're going around the two women who are Republicans on the committee and trying to do backroom deals with the guys because those girls, they just don't understand how the issues work. Here's how 920 works, and here's how the discussions have gone. The two Republican conservative women on the Judiciary Committee agree with 80% of LB 920. That represents the consensus items that the CJI committee, which Senator Geist, Senator McKinney, and Senator Lathrop have worked on for months. I support those. Senator Geist supports those. She has an amendment on 920, a white copy amendment, to adopt those. It's that remaining 15 to 20% that genuinely compromise the safety of my community and your communities. And that's not talking like we're going to put it on a mailer. That is putting felons, drug felons, violent felons, out of prison earlier under the guise of, well, we'll lower our prison population, maybe. I'm just honestly beside myself that the same senator who gets up and bemoans like the sanctity of the institution and how you can't personally attack senators
is not only personally attacking senators by belittling them and saying that they're only capable of thought when a text gets on their phone, but also throwing the only women who are subject matter experts in this area under the bus by kicking them out of negotiations. I'm glad Senator Linehan called it out. Senator Geist is not here to stand up for herself today, and this is not a new trend in the Nebraska legislature, but it definitely deserves to be called out when it happens, and it is happening on 9/20. But I can assure you, if you're sitting at home or watching on the floor, yes, negotiations on 9/20 are absolutely going on behind the scenes. I'm just honestly a little bit beyond words right now that we can.
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Lower ourselves to personal attacks and exclude women from negotiations that are subject matter experts under the guise of, well, they don't know what they're talking about. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
This is your third opportunity as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. I have to respond to that. I'm going to try to be measured in my response. That was taking this circumstance and twisting it and trying to turn it into me making a personal attack is completely off the mark. I resent it. When you say those things, you have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. You weren't in the room yesterday. You have no idea what I got for a response or what that looked like. And there's nobody trying to go around any women in this place. That is nonsense. It is nonsense. The irony is you would try to make it look like I'm personally attacking somebody by attacking me. But that's what we've come to expect. And that's what this turns into when we get to a serious issue, but you guys can't get a text message from the corner office to go ahead and solve a problem and vote for a bill. We get this kind of crap. You guys at the end of the day can do what you want. I'll sit in the room with anybody that can get to yes. It is not productive for me to sit in a room with people that can't get to yes. And I'm not going to betray my conversations in the room yesterday. I'm not going to talk about what they look like, where they went, the struggles that Senator McKinney and I experienced trying to be involved and to persuade and to get movement. And I have not insulted Senator Geist. I have on many occasions said I appreciate her on the committee. She shows up. She's there most of the time, which I appreciate. She asks good questions. And I know she cares about this issue. We have a difference in the point of view. I better stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Walz, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lathrop talked briefly about the difference between someone serving a longer sentence and being released into society without any checks, and someone being released early and being on parole and having to wear the ankle bracelet so everybody knew where he was or she was. The drug testing that goes on, the training, the employment, the mental health opportunities that they have to abide by for the remainder of their sentence. And I think you gave the example of 5 years. I'm not going to talk to you as a senator right now. I'm going to talk to you as a citizen. And I'm going to talk to you as a parent and a grandparent. My comfort level as a citizen knowing that somebody being released from prison and moving next door to me, my comfort level would be much better if I knew that that person had checks, that person was being watched, that person was being trained, that person was being prepared and helped back into society. I understand that the consensus items, I had a brief conversation with Senator Slum, and we talked about our comfort levels. And I understand that some of the consensus items do involve training and mental health services and resources. But there's a big difference, I would imagine, of all of that stuff happening in prison as opposed to when you're released and expected to just remember to do them. Being released into, with the friends and the people that you were with prior to going to prison. I would imagine that there's a big difference. So as a citizen, my comfort level is really, I feel better knowing that somebody would be on parole 3 years, 5 years down the road, and that they were being helped back into society. And actually, again, I don't want to talk about this as a senator. I'd rather talk about this as a citizen. But when we think about this politically, the mailers that go out should be turned upside down. And knowing that someone is released even early, but is being watched and on parole, should be the mailer that says we're tough on crime as opposed to soft on crime. The other thing I just briefly wanted to talk about, I just wanted to put this on the record, was LB 825. And the fact that that bill was passed unanimously, not unanimously, but the majority of people passed that bill, 820, advanced. Thank you, Senator DeBoer. That was a bill that we all cared about. That was a bill that the majority of Nebraskans cared about. And I just wanted it on the record, like Senator Moorfield said, that was a bill that we could all get around and advance. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Clerk, you have a motion on the desk?
Mr. President, I do. Senator Stinner would move to invoke closure pursuant to Rule 7, Section 10.
It is the ruling of the chair that there has been full and fair debate afforded to LB 1011E. Senator Stinner, for what purpose do you rise?
I'd like a roll call in reverse order, please.
Members, we're on final reading, so we would ask you to please check in. All members are present. Mr. Clerk, call the roll.
Senator Stinner, reverse order. Thank you. Senator Wishart, voting yes. Senator Williams, voting yes. Senator Wayne, Senator Walls, voting yes. Senator Vargas, voting yes. Senator Stinner, voting yes. Senator Slama, not voting. Senator Saunders, voting yes. Senator Pansy Brooks, voting yes. Senator Pauls, Senator Merman, not voting. Senator Moser, voting yes. Senator Moorfeld, voting yes. Senator McKinney, voting yes. Senator McDonald, voting yes. Senator McAllister, voting yes. Senator Lowe, not voting. Senator Linehan, not voting. Senator Lindstrom, voting yes. Senator Lathrop, voting yes. Senator Coulterman, voting yes. Senator Jacobson, voting yes. Senator Hunt, voting yes. Senator Hughes, voting yes. Senator Hickelman, voting yes. Senator Hildress, voting yes. Senator Matt Hanson, voting yes. Senator Ben Hanson, Senator Halloran, not voting. Senator Gregor, not voting. Senator Geist, Senator Friesen, voting no. Senator Flood, voting yes. Senator Erdman, voting yes. Senator Dorn, voting yes. Senator DeBoer, voting yes. Senator Day, voting yes. Senator Clements, voting yes. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, excuse me, voting yes. Senator John Kavanaugh, voting yes. Senator Breesy, voting no. Senator Brewer, voting yes. Senator Brandt, voting yes. Senator Bostelman, voting yes. Senator Bostar, voting yes. Senator Blood, voting yes. Senator Arch, voting yes. Senator Albright, voting no. Senator Aguilar, voting yes. 36 ayes, 3 nays on the motion to invoke cloture, Mr. President.
The motion to invoke cloture is adopted. Mr. Clerk,
Pending is Senator Kavanaugh's bracket motion, Mr. President.
the question is the adoption of the bracket motion 189. All those in favor vote aye, opposed nay. Has everyone voted? Mr. Clerk?
1A, 43 nays, Mr. President, on the motion to bracket the bill.
The motion is not adopted. Next item, dispensing with the reading. All those in favor vote aye, opposed nay. Mr. Clerk?
34A, 6 nays to dispense with the at-large reading.
Dispensing with the reading is adopted. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, gross legislative bill 1011. It's a bill introduced by the Speaker at the request of the Governor. It's a bill for equity appropriations. It amends laws 2021 LB 380, sections 24, 48, 81, 89, 95, 96, 98, 183, 184, 118, 111, 116, 120, 136, 56, 58, 98, 217, 246, 261, 262, 66, and 67. It defines terms and provides changes and eliminates appropriations for the operations of state government, repeals the original sections, outright repeals laws 2021 LB 396A, and declares an emergency.
Members, the vote is the advancement of LB 1011E. All provisions of law relative to procedure have been complied with. The question is, shall LB 1011E be adopted? With the emergency clause, all those in favor vote aye, opposed nay. Mr. Clerk, please record.
Voting aye. Senators Aguilar, Arch, Blood, Bostar, Boston, Brandt, Brewer, Kavanaugh, Clements, Day, DeBoer, Dorn, Erdman, Flood, Gregor, Ben Hanson, Hilders, Hickelman, Hughes, Hunt, Jacobson, Coulterman, Lathrop, Lindstrom, McCollister, McDonald, McKinney, Morfeld, Moser, Pansy and Brooks, Sanders, Slamas, Stinner, Vargas, Walls, Williams, and Wishart. Voting no, Senators Albright, Breesy, Friesen, Holleran. Not voting, Senators Matt Hanson, Linehan, Lowe, Merman, Geist, Pauls, and Wayne. 38 ayes, 4 nays, 4 present, not voting, 3 excused, not voting, Mr. President.
LB 1011E passes. Mr. Clerk?
Mr. President, before we proceed, I have some items. Hearing notice from the General Affairs Committee. Enrollment and review reports, LB 1083 to select file. I also have a series of study resolutions. 399, Senator Lathrop, Brandt 400, Friesen 401, McCollister 402, McKinney 403, and 404, Stinner 405, 406, Arch 407, McKinney 408, Arch 409, 410, 411, DeBoer 412, Senator Dorn 413, McDonald 414. Mr. President, final reading with respect to Legislative Bill 1013, I do have motions. I do have a priority motion, however. Senator Kavanaugh would move to bracket the bill until March 30 of 2022.
Senator Kavanaugh, you're welcome to open on your bracket motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I appreciate everyone voting against my last bracket motion, except for Senator Friesen. But I do appreciate Senator Friesen voting for something of mine, so thank you. I would encourage you all to vote against this bracket motion as well, just trying to preserve the integrity of our budget bills because they have to pass today and they cannot be moved to select for amendments. Otherwise, we will not be in compliance with our own rules. So that's what the bracket motion is about. And I have mislaid my copy of 1013. So I will probably be getting back in the queue and talking about it a little bit. So for now, how much time do I have, Mr. President?
9 minutes 6.
Okay, I'd like to yield that to Senator Lathrop if he would like it.
Senator Lathrop, 9 minutes.
Thank you. And Senator Kavanaugh, thank you. I want to talk about the sort of the where Senator McKinney and I went yesterday as we were trying to work on 920 to get some movement on 920 and maybe tell you, you've heard about the consensus items. So Senator Geist has filed an amendment to 920. That amendment actually doesn't even include all of the consensus items, but it has a number of them in there that are the kinds of things that I've described, giving gift cards to people on probation, those kind of things that don't affect our population projection. But let me talk to you a little bit about what we are willing and what we offered yesterday. And we find ourselves bidding against ourselves in this process, just so that you know what that looked like, because we filed an amendment that was responsive to some concerns that we heard when LB 920 was introduced. So law enforcement came in and said, this fentanyl is a whole different breed of cat. That fentanyl can't be included in your bill. You have to carve it out because fentanyl is a very, very, very dangerous substance, is very dangerous in its pure form, very dangerous. And that piece was taken out even as we developed the committee amendment. So what we have are two provisions that relate to parole eligibility. One is a bill that you passed 2 years ago, that was LB 1004, that provides a 2 years before your mandatory discharge date if your sentence is 5 years or longer. The other piece of that parole eligibility, by the way, at the risk of repeating myself, hopefully this is sinking in. Preventing jam outs was a consensus item. Everyone there agreed that preventing jam outs is important for all the reasons that I've described. So the committee amendment said essentially that if you're going to get an indeterminate sentence, that the lower number of the indeterminate sentence needs to be half of the larger number. So if you're going to get a 10-year sentence, it needs to be 5 to 10. If you're going to get a 20-year sentence, it needs to be 10 to 20 or 15 to 30. I think you get the idea. Yesterday, we said, we'll make as a concession two things about that indeterminate sentence. We'll make it 60% of the high number. So you would get a 6 to 10-year sentence or a 9 to 15-year sentence. The lower number, remember, is your parole eligibility date. The higher number is your mandatory discharge date. We agreed to move that, or we offered to move it to 60, and colleagues cap the window at 10 years. So it can never be, or the law won't require that it be any bigger than that parole eligibility window, any bigger than 10 years. And with good time, what that means is you have an opportunity for parole 5 years before your mandatory discharge date. Why is that important? If you're following along, that's because now we're going to follow that person for the balance of their sentence until their mandatory discharge date. Following people is important. Having them accountable to a parole officer is important. This would have the effect of increasing the amount of time people are under supervision coming out of the Department of Corrections. Everybody agrees that's a good thing, which makes why people aren't clamoring to get on board with this puzzling. That's been addressed already this morning. I'm not going to go back there. I made this example, and it came to me from Josh Henningsen, my legal counsel, but I'm going to make this point again since we have people up in the balcony. If you have someone who is going to leave the Department of Corrections and move next door to you, would you feel more comfortable if that person spent one more year in prison before they became your next door neighbor? Or would you feel more comfortable if they became your next door neighbor a year sooner and were accountable to a parole officer for the first year they were your next door neighbor? That's the point of this. We're talking about having people supervised longer, ankle bracelet, reporting to the parole officer, maintaining employment, staying out of trouble, taking drug tests, those things for a longer period of time. And we know, just as a matter of criminal science, that that's way more effective than just having somebody get out and be accountable to no one. That's why it's a consensus item. So we made that offer, we made that concession, or offered to make that concession. We're happy to make that or put that into an amendment. One of the things we did was to do what Oklahoma did and some other states, and that's to make a small possession of a controlled substance a Class 1 misdemeanor rather than a Class 4 felony. Why? Because the amount that we're talking about is less than 0.5 gram, so it's clearly at the level of a personal use and not a dealer. 0.5 gram, that's about the size of your little fingernail if you've never seen a controlled substance. If you're like me and you've never seen a controlled substance, that's the quantity we're talking about. Why is that? A Class 4 felony carries 2 years in prison. Class 1 misdemeanor carries a year in the county jail, right? When we put a felony on somebody for this kind of an offense, it makes them hard for them to find employment. It makes it hard for them to find a place to live. It follows them around for the rest of their life. And what are we trying to solve? We're trying typically to solve someone's addiction by punishing them and thinking that if we give them time, the more time we give them, the more they're going to get the message and quit using drugs. The reality is it's a health issue. And so what Senator McKinney and I did yesterday was say, let's do this. Let's make it a class 1 misdemeanor for the first 4 times you get caught and a felony for the 5th time. Why'd we do that? Because the other day, Senator Geist made this point, and she's right. At some point, you need a felony to get these people into drug court, to get them to go into substance abuse inpatient treatment. It's not going to happen on the first or the second time. They're simply going to say, I don't have a problem. I can stop this whenever I want, right? So we modified that proposal from the amendment that was put out by the Judiciary Committee
1 minute.
in the form of an offer. One of the other issues we had was the habitual criminal statute. Right now, if you have 3 felonies, on your 3rd felony, at the discretion of the county attorney, they can file the habitual criminal statute. What that means is if you get convicted of 3 felonies, you will then have a mandatory minimum of 10 years. There's no good time, there's no parole, you are going to do 10 years. This has been a bill in front of Judiciary Committee. I think Senator Kavanaugh's brought it. I think Senator Wayne's brought it in the past to say those first 2 convictions need to be a violent offense or a sex offense. But if you have somebody that gets caught with residue in a crack pipe and you get them on 1 felony and they go away, and then you catch them with some drugs the next time and they go away and get a 2nd felony, you could literally be sending someone to prison
Time,
for
Senator.
a felony shoplifting. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hughes, you are recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to remind all of my colleagues that 12 noon today is the deadline for all interim studies to be introduced or given up front. So if you've got any laying on your desk that you have not turned in, now's the time to do it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Debate is now open. Senator Matt Hansen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll yield my time to Senator Lathrop.
Senator Lathrop, 4 minutes, 50 seconds.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hansen. I appreciate that opportunity. When we come back this afternoon, I don't know that this thing has to go 2 hours. I'll talk to the speaker about shortening it. I do want to make this point, and I don't know if the speaker's on the floor, but I would like to see 920 come up before we take the tax bill up for the 3rd time. I think it's only fair that 920 have its day on the floor before we take the tax bill up for the 3rd time. I don't know what the speaker's intentions are, but I want to be clear about my ask so that we don't go, God, I didn't know you wanted it up before the tax bill comes up for the 3rd time. Let me go on and further explain that habitual criminal. So right now, any 3 felonies will work to get someone in their 3rd conviction a mandatory minimum of 10 years. And they can be like, you walk into Apple Computer, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do this, nor saying it's not okay to, it's not bad to do this, but if you walk into Apple and steal one of these laptops, you're going to get hit with a felony. Felony number 1. If you have a small quantity, even residue in a crack pipe, felony number 2. The 3rd thing will get you a mandatory minimum. So for those citizens that are here and listening, we spend $49,000 a year per inmate to house these guys. And the question that we're dealing with on the floor today is that money better spent on rehabilitation, or do we really want to make a $500,000 investment by throwing somebody with 3 relatively minor felonies into the Department of Corrections on a mandatory minimum of 10 years? It is about public safety, and it is about where we're going to invest those dollars. When you think about the time that people spend at the department, understand that if you take their budget and divide it by the 5,500 people that are there, you get to $49,000 per year per inmate. This is a fiscal issue. It is a budget issue, and that's why we're talking about it right now. The other proposal that was in the amendment that came out of the Judiciary Committee dealt with consecutive sentences. Consecutive sentences are where you put them into end, right? So if you get convicted of 3 things, instead of having them served at the same time and you stay as long as the longest one would require, they call it boxcarring in the courthouse apparently. If you boxcar those and put them end to end to end, now somebody's spending 3 times as much time for what may well be just one dumb thing that was done. Yesterday we said, let's change those criteria. It requires a finding by the court. We made an offer yesterday, Senator McKinney and I did, to say, let's have that consideration be, if it's a separate transaction or occurrence, then that's reason enough to give a consecutive sentence. And a separate occurrence would include resisting arrest. So if you steal that laptop and you're out in the parking lot and now the law enforcement's trying to apprehend you and you want to fight with them, that's
1 minute.
good enough reason for a consecutive sentence. Why is this important? Because our Department of Corrections is filling up with a bunch of people who are convicted of the lowest level of felony and are doing consecutive sentences. So Senator Mosher asked me this question. So if we have fewer people coming in, how come the place is getting overcrowded? Again, using the warehouse, we have our crime rates going down, our incarceration rates going down, but we're still not having people come out of the Department of Corrections as fast as they're going in. So they are stacking up. We call that the stacking effect. They are stacking up in the Department of Corrections. And this bill is and our work is intended to address that stacking effect. In other words, do these people need to be here? Is there a better investment of the taxpayer's dollar? Does it make more sense to have somebody get care and treatment than to spend 4
Time,
years
Senator.
instead of 3? Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Friesen, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Since Senator Lathrop is talking about the 920 bill, I'll engage in some questions if he'd yield to a few.
Senator Lathrop, will you yield?
Senator Kurt Friesen, I'd be happy to. Hopefully.
Thank you. So when I talk to my county attorneys, and I'm not saying if I'm for or against 920, but when I talk to my county prosecutors, they say there's no one in jail that has just created 3 felonies even, or just, they have a long rap sheet. They've been in front of the judge a dozen times. They're tired of seeing them there. They won't take drug treatment. They won't do this. They won't cooperate. Finally, they send them to prison. Is that the case? Is that what we're seeing in prison? Or are we seeing people with just small amounts of residue in their pipes, selling marijuana?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I got 2 things in response. One is, I was out in Scottsbluff giving a talk to a group of people out there about 5 months ago. And a defense lawyer, one of the public defenders out there, came to me and said, I have a client right now who has 2 prior felonies, and right now they are using the habitual criminal statute on residue. So cops pull somebody over, they see a pipe in there and they scrape it out. There's no drugs in the car, but they scrape it out enough to test it and establish that it's a controlled substance. That guy is headed to prison for 10 years. I would invite you to read an article, the Lincoln Journal-Star. When we talk about the habitual criminal statute, the Lincoln Journal-Star did a story about 2 months ago, and I put it on the Judiciary Committee website. So if you go to that website, you'll be able to catch up with it. The disparity in the manner in which the the habitual criminal statute is used from one side of the state to the next is the problem. if we used Douglas County as an example, probably not being abused. Maybe it's being used as leverage, but it's not being abused like it is in some other jurisdictions. And that's data that's in CJI's findings.
So
And
is that due to the county prosecutor or?
Yes, it is a completely discretionary call by the county attorney. I don't know which county attorney you're talking about, and I'm not sure I know any of them in your district, but some of them use it way more often, and some of them use it far less than others, but the disparity is pretty significant, and putting some constraint that just says the third felony can be whatever the third felony is, but the first two need to be a violent felony or some kind of a sex offense.
Okay, yeah, I've just talked to a couple of county attorneys. This is not widespread. But again, it goes back to, from what I'm always hearing is that it's not these just little things, but they add up to so much that they're saying this person isn't learning. They've been given chance after chance to correct themselves and they refuse to do so. What do you do then besides send them to prison?
Well, the person that doesn't get it should probably be in prison if they're not drug addicts. Like, the idea behind problem-solving courts is we take somebody who's a high-need, high-risk person and give them focused attention and put them through drug court.
Well, I think the drug
That's an
courts
alternative.
have done a good job of that, but they're not available everywhere, the way I take it.
1 minute.
But again, it goes back to if a person is given these chances, and what I've been told is that the only time that they'll actually get treatment is you get them in prison and they have to go. But it turns out they don't have to. They can just refuse treatment and
they don't
jammed
have
out.
to somebody go through it. You can't make them take the cure either, right? If you know somebody who's had a substance abuse problem of any kind, they kind of have to be ready for the cure, and they call it the cure. One of the issues for when you talk about putting somebody, I think the data shows that putting somebody in prison doesn't make them more likely to not use when they get out. Many of these people have access to drugs. The department, despite their best efforts, and I'm not being critical of the department in this respect, the contraband and the substance, particularly K2, that gets into the prisons, if you got a problem, you can find
Time,
drugs
Senator.
to use while you're in there.
Thank you, Senators Friesen and Lathrop. Senator Pansing Brooks, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I am again standing to talk about the fact that we need more sentencing reform to make it safer in our communities. And we also need more programming. And I don't know how many times you all need to hear me say that, so I'm going to move on and talk about the fact that on the last day of the legislature, as you all know, the seniors get to talk about their positive experiences in the legislature, and we are not given all the time in the world. So I want to continue my talks about the value and the friendship that I've made with so many of you, each of you here, as my legislative colleagues. So I've gone through this alphabetically, and I'm looking to see who is here right now that I can talk about. Senator Erdman, is he gone? Where's everybody? It's final read. I thought I'd be safe here. Oh, okay. Oh. Okay, Senator Erdman, I'm going to be talking about you back there in the corner. So Senator Erdman has a wonderful sense of humor. You always know where Senator Erdman is coming from. He's basically an open book. He's been very consistent about voting against every call of the House, and so he is a very consistent man. He has great pride in his community, and actually, he's a bit of a smarty pants. In fact, he brought his big boy pants one time his first year and lent them out to people. So, Senator Erdman, I've enjoyed your sense of humor. I've enjoyed your persistent efforts on taxation, and it has been an honor to serve the people of Nebraska with you, Senator Erdman. Senator Greigert. There's Senator Greigert. Senator Greigert is a very humble man. He's thoughtful, and he's a hero to our country and our state. He has made huge differences on healthy soils. I've been grateful to get to work and support some of his efforts in that area. He's extremely knowledgeable in that area. And I'm sorry he's not coming back next year, but Senator Greigert, it has been an honor to serve the people of Nebraska with you. Senator Halloran. Senator Halloran has a really wonderful sense of humor. He served on the judiciary initially when he came into the body, and I got to know him better then. If you aren't careful, Senator Halloran, people will realize you have a big heart. And he moved off, I think, because people thought he was listening too much and voting on things that would help people. Senator Halloran is a wonderful guy, and he has a darling wife, Ann, and it has truly been an honor to serve the people of Nebraska with you, Senator Halloran. Is Senator Ben Hansen. Senator Ben Hansen is a thoughtful and knowledgeable on many of the health care issues. He has been willing to work with all people no matter what. He's willing to talk and listen to various ideas, and he has done a really good job of being willing to—
1 minute.
Thank you. He's been done a really good job of trying to listen and work with others. I was fortunate to get to work with him on our current bill this year on cytomegalovirus, which is an issue that happens to newborn. I really appreciate that work together. He also has an amazing ability to keep things calm, as has happened in a couple of his more controversial issues in some of the committee hearings. So I appreciate Senator Ben Hansen, and it has been an honor to serve the people of Nebraska with you, Senator Hansen. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Before we continue, Senator Brandt would like to recognize the second 75 members of the 4th grade class, Crete Intermediate School in Crete, Nebraska, seated in the north balcony. Students, please rise and be welcomed by your Nebraska Legislature. Senator Linehan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is a cash transfer bill, 1013, and I like a lot of things in this bill, a lot of them. The water projects, the military base development and support, trail development. I think maybe we could do the trail for less than 8.3 million, but whatever. I love trails, I've said that before. I'm 50 million for rural projects fund. I'm reading for the bill here. Which part of that is workforce housing? Well, there's 30 million for workforce housing. There is 20 million for the intern cash fund. Another one where I thought maybe we didn't need 20, but I understand it's an important program. 20 million to middle income housing workforce, 80 million for fund jobs and economic development initiative, 20 million for site and building development. It's actually, most of this is in your book, the appropriators handed out on page 3. These are transformational projects. That's what we're trying to do here, big things. And I'm excited that we have the opportunity to do big things, not only because we have the ARPA funding, but because we have a tremendous amount of money in our cash reserve. But I can't support spending. I think if you total it up from the cash funds and the ARPA, and you add back in lapse funding that I figured out this morning, because the lapse funding is actually new spending, it's 1.75, well, let's just read it out, 1,750,000,000 in spending. And remember, this isn't a body that some years we can't bring up an A bill. So I don't know how we can possibly do the spending and not do tax cuts. And let's remember what the tax cut package is that failed by one vote. Not failed, didn't have enough votes to pass. It had plenty of votes to pass. It failed by one vote on cloture. Not enough votes. We have enough votes to pass it. They have enough votes to pass the budget. But if we keep moving down this and it's the 33 and that's where we got to get an agreement, that's not the way what legislatures work. I've been legislative, whether it's in DC, in the Senate, or studied it all my life, or here in the legislature. The way this is supposed to work is everybody wins. That's where we got on 1107. And it was just like this. Long, drawn out, behind the door closed meetings, fights on the floor. You only win when everybody wins. And for this to pass, and everybody to get what they want in this bill, we have to have tax cuts. This is not going to work if we think we're going to spend $1.75 billion and we don't have tax cuts. Not going to work. We all know that. And the tax cuts, this is the tax cut that failed on Friday, Social Security tax cuts, I think first round, and Senator Moorfield spoke to this morning at 44 votes. Now, some people don't like corporate, but you know what? Some people love it. So again, there are things in here. I wouldn't spend 8.3 million on trail. I'd spend maybe 4 and then see how far they got, and then maybe come back next year and give them another 4, because I know that area really well. I'm having a very hard time figuring out why it would cost 8 million. But move on. If we get a tax package, because there's nothing in these appropriation bills that I have found, and I've read them all, that go to my district. Not a penny. But I have people in my district who don't want to pay taxes on their Social Security, that know they can move to Colorado and many other places, Arizona, Florida, not pay any taxes. They know they live in Elkhorn, they love Elkhorn just like I do, but they're kind of sick and tired of paying somewhere between $6,000 and $15,000 in property taxes for their house. And yes, they pay income taxes, a lot of them. And many of them work for corporations that also pay income taxes. So my district, my constituents care about the tax package. And we're going to have to figure out a way, if we're going to move this forward and move it all forward, we're going to have to figure out a way to do the tax package. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Linehan. Senator McDonald, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know everyone's getting ready to go to lunch. I just wanted to say something about yesterday. The reason that we were meeting with Senator Geist and Senator Lathrop, Senator McKinney, was I asked them if we could sit down, and not that because I'm a subject matter expert on prison reform, and I know how much time they put in, the passion they have for it, but I wanted to find out if there was a way to a compromise. And I could say that throughout those approximately 9 hours yesterday, off and on, they were professional, all 3 of them. They were polite and they were passionate. Just because you don't agree doesn't mean that you're wrong. And there's possibly another path to agree on. And the idea that we as a body cannot give up on prison reform. And I know by this morning how many people have come to discuss different ideas with me. People are brainstorming, and that's what we need. But the idea that this morning, before one of my first phone calls this morning was from Senator Lathrop, and he wanted to discuss another idea and how we were going forward this morning. But also Senator Geist, who's not with us here today because she's not feeling very well. You know what she's doing where she's supposed to be resting? She's working on LB 920. She's at home right now. I've had 3 conversations with her on the phone. She's trying to find how can we enhance the things we do agree upon instead of continuing to fight over the things we disagree upon. It is about prison reform. It is about doing the right thing for the state of Nebraska. So everyone that's been involved, again, I want to thank Senator McKinney and Senator Lathrop, Senator Geist for their work. And hopefully, again, this afternoon, we're going to get some new ideas and continue to have this discussion in a positive way and help move our state forward. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator McDonald. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign and do hereby sign LB 1012E and LB 1011E, as well as the following LRs. LR 341, 342, 343, 344, and 345. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, a few study resolutions, 415, Senator Jacobson, Lindstrom, 16, Ben Hansen, 17, Bostar, 18, Bostman, 19, Ben Hansen, 420, Bostar, 21, Wayne, 422, John Kavanaugh, 423, and 24, Senator Lathrop, 425. Mr. President, Senator DeBoer would move to recess the body until 1:00 p.m.
Colleagues, for the motion, all those in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. We are in recess.